Hello, welcome to the Las Vegas Conversation on Board Diversity. My name is Connie Harper. I am the chair of the event and the moderator for today's VIP panel. The theme of today's program is Leading the Way to Diverse and Gender Balanced Boards, and I am excited to begin that conversation. But first, thank you all for managing your schedule to be here today. I'm sure that you will find our time together valuable. I also want to thank our Las Vegas leadership team, without whose efforts this program would not have been possible. So that's Eileen Moore Johnson, Chief Human Resources Officer at Scientific Games, Keith Smith, President and CEO at Boyd Gaming Corporation, Ashley Andrews, Community Relations Manager at Bank of America, Las Vegas, Monica Moradigan, Vice President of Community Relations at Wynn Resorts Limited, Sunday Davis, Audit Senior Manager at Deloitte, and Anna Munoz, Corporate Director of Community and Diversity Affairs at Caesars Entertainment. This amazing team put together an impressive group of our local corporate sponsors. And they are Scientific Games Corporation, Boyd Gaming Corporation, Bank of America Las Vegas, Wynn Resorts Limited, Deloitte, and Caesars Entertainment. In addition to them, we also had global sponsors, EY, Ernest Young, BYN Mellon, Bank of America, MasterCard, Marsh, Citizens, Kaiser Permanente, Equilar, Citizens, Twitter, and McKinsey & Company. So on behalf of all of our attendees, thank you for your sponsorship. Without your support, we would not be able to have our program today. So how will the day go? We will be sharing PowerPoint slides showing what we've accomplished toward our goal of board diversity since last year. Then we will talk with our VIP panelists for an hour. Then we'll move to breakout rooms where you can ask your questions for another hour. So with no further ado, let me tell you a little about our first speaker, Mally Giro. So she is the visionary who created and launched this international organization. From 2010 to 2017, Mally served as president of 2020 Women on Boards, a campaign to increase diversity and gender balance on for-profit corporate boards of directors to 20% or more by the year 2020. Before launching 2020 Women on Boards, Mally had a long career in marketing, communications, and public relations. She was principal of Gyro Communications, a boutique PR firm that she founded in 1985 and specializing in B2B, nonprofit, and hospitality sectors with a special emphasis in women's leadership. Amazingly, 2020 Women on Board surpassed its goal of 20% representation in September of 2020. So we rebranded, committed to full parity, and launched 50/50 Women on Boards in January 21. So Mallory is going to kick off our program this morning by reviewing where we've been and predicting where we will be going. So Mallory, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Connie. So good to see you, and thanks for inviting me. Only thing better would be if I was really with you, because I'm speaking to you from Boston, Massachusetts. Can we have the first slide, please? Okay, so quarterly and annually, 50/50 Women on Boards uses the data provided by our partner Equilar to release our Gender Diversity Index key findings, where we analyze the percentage of women on boards nationwide by sector and state. We also report on the percentage of women selected for new board seats, and based on those who self-identify, we report on the race and ethnicity of all directors. So let's look at the year-over-year progress nationally and in Nevada. Here's the good news. We're happy to report that nationally, women now hold 25.6% of Russell 3000 Index company board seats, a 3 percentage point increase since last year, and the most significant year-over-year increase over the previous 5 years. We're just slightly over that halfway mark to women holding 50% of the corporate board seats. Next slide, please. So here's the not so good news. In Nevada, women hold 20.9% of the Russell 3000 company board seats, down from 21.2% last year. So a little bit of a drop here. Of the 25 states with more than 20 R3K companies that we track, Nevada is the least diverse of any other state. So let's hope that this reversal is just a blip, that as the economy gets stronger, particularly in the travel and gaming industries, we're going to see some improvement here. Can we see the next slide? Thanks. 50/50 Women on Board ranks Russell 3000 company boards as gender balanced, 3+ boards with 3 or more women, 2 companies with 2 women on their boards, and 1 and 0 companies with 1 woman or no women on their boards. Using the rankings, we can identify how many company boards are gender balanced. And as of Q2 2021, 215 out of 2,987, or about 7% of the Russell 3000 companies, have gender balanced boards. This compares to Q4 of 2020, where only 5% of corporate boards were gender balanced. So we've seen some real progress in just a short time. Next slide, please. Nevada. So what's happening in Nevada? In 2021, there are no gender balanced companies here. But last year, there were 2, Pico Holdings and Wynn Resorts. Pico Holdings is no longer an active company, and what we know is when a company changes its board composition, things change, and that seems to be what happened this year. So we know that this situation can be easily changed with corporate action, but there's something else that we need to pay attention to here, and that is that the number of 0 companies also increased this year. So we have a lot of work to do here in Nevada, but it's not something we can't manage. We're going to get the job done. For all companies to be gender balanced in Nevada, company boards will need to add between 56 and 100 women, depending on whether a woman replaces a man or a seat is added. There's plenty of opportunity for women to join the board here, and Nevada, we can do this. In addition to 50-50 Women on Boards advocating for gender balance on boards, our mission is to ensure that boards are diverse and that women of color hold at least 20% of all board seats. Out of the total directors who serve on publicly traded boards, only 17% self-report their race and ethnicity, and of that, 12% are people of color, which breaks down to 4.5% women and 7.4% men, which is very low. Furthermore, when we break the percentages down by race and ethnicity, the lack of people of color on boards is even more apparent. So, at 50-50 Women on Boards, we call for companies to be intentional when searching for diverse board candidates outside of their networks. We encourage board directors to self-identify by claiming or creating an Equilar Board Edge profile, which will help us better assess and develop solutions for underrepresented groups. And we're going to put that in the chat for you, so you'll have access to that. And finally, men and women in seats of power need to serve as allies and advocate for women outside of their networks. These results are far from our goal of women of color holding 20% of the corporate board seats, which is why these conversations and educational training and awareness programs led by 50-50 Women on Boards are essential to generating further awareness, education, and collaboration. Thank you for being here today. Thanks for inviting me. And I'm going to turn you back to Connie C at the breakouts.
Thank you, Mally.
Thank you.
I'm totally inspired by your vision of where we can go with a little hard work. So, speaking for all Nevadans, we're going to roll up our sleeves and make sure that we achieve diversity and gender balance here in Nevada in the next year. How about that? Okay, great. So let's move on to our VIP panel. So I'm proud to say that our panel has a wealth of knowledge and experience to share with us. So let me introduce you to them. First, we have Molly Campbell, who has been a board member for East West Bank, a member of the 25 largest banks in the US for 7 years, and a member of the Granite Construction Board for 2 years, as well as other things. I invite you to look at the LinkedIn pages of all of our VIP panelists at your leisure, because I'm only going to give a sentence to introduce them, and they've all been so busy and so successful in their careers that there's more to them than what I have time to say today. So Adela Cepeda has been a member of the BMO Financial Group for 9 years, and she chairs its Capital Committee and also sits on its Audit and Trust Committees. Neelan Youngblood currently serves on the board of directors of Scientific Games, where he sits on its Compensation Committee, and he has also served on the boards of directors of Starwood Hotels, Burger King, and Gap. And finally, Christine Spatafor is currently a member of the board of directors of Boyd Gaming Corporation, where she chairs the governance and nominating committees and formerly served on its audit and compensation committees. So thank you all for joining us today. So let's just get right to it. So we know that there are basically two routes to a corporate board seat. One is by networking, being in the right place at the right time, knowing the right person. And the other is being promoted from the corporation C-suite. So let's go back to the time in history before you were on your first board seat, because for the most part, our attendees are not corporate directors. And so they want to know how to become a corporate director. So we're going to have you travel back in time to before you were a corporate director. So tell us, Molly, how did you receive your first board seat? Networking or promotion? Molly, are you on mute?
I was on mute, so I'm good now. Thank you, Connie, so much. Great question. I think for me, it was more of the networking part of it. I happened to be in the right place in the right time, but I will also add some intentionality. I wasn't as aware of corporate boards until I had a conversation with a friend who was on a corporate board. And quite frankly, it was something I kind of put out there as an intention that I wanted to achieve. And my first board came about because I was chief financial officer and chief operating officer with the Port of Los Angeles for quite some time. And one of our board members, again, that's not a public corporate board, but it was an agency, happened to be connected with a corporate board who was looking for their corporate director that had finance and background and experience. And because of that, that's how I got my first one, which was just right place at the right time, knowing someone and kind of putting it out to the universe as well.
Okay, great. Adela, how about you? How did you get your first board seat?
Sure. And I just want to say it was a very long time ago. My first board was about 1992. So we're going on almost 30 years. And it was a set of closed-end funds. And I would say it was network. I certainly wasn't aware of these corporate boards at the time in this way. I was already serving on some nonprofit boards, but I joined a leadership organization that had a lot of receptions, and someone went there and asked for, I think, for a woman with finance experience. So kind of mirroring Molly, they were looking for a particular expertise. And then I think they were intentional about a woman. And that's how I got on the first set of closed-end funds. And they were the Lincoln National Income and the Lincoln National Convertible Funds. And then, of course, I had to speak to the asset classes, and I was very conversant in that space. I don't know who else, how they went through the process. I think it was word of mouth. There was no search firm per se. And I'd say was very unusual. I'd say the average age on the board was like 65, and there were like 6 or 7 other board members. So when I came in my 30s, it hardly moved the average by many years. So maybe they were intentional on age as well. I don't know. But finance was definitely the key.
Okay, great. How about you, Christine? Are you on mute?
Thank you. We need a little sign that says you're on mute. How many times a day do we say that? My first publicly traded board was 12 years ago when I joined Boyd Gaming Corporation. And it was actually more serendipitous than anything. I was giving a keynote at a luncheon for a business group. There was a gentleman in the audience who heard me speak, obviously liked what I had to say, and got in touch with Mr. Boyd. They'd been friends for decades. And he said, I know you've got a search going on for a director. You have an open seat. I think you really need to talk to this woman. So quite out of the blue, I get a call from Mr. Boyd. And again, the search process had been going on for some time. I went through, as is customary, a very stringent interview process, and just sort of coming in from the side, was elected to the board. And I think the reason I was selected is because I've got a varied background. I'm an attorney. I was a partner at the Boston Consulting Group, so it brings strategy and risk management. And I think at the time they were looking for someone who could probably play a lot of different positions. I'm proud to say that at Boyd Gaming, we have 30% women on our board. And as chair of the Governance and Nominating Committee, I'm proud of the organization for many reasons, but in my specific role as chair of governance and nominating, in publicly traded companies, that position is held by only 14% women. So Boyd is really walking the talk when it comes to diversity on the board and really making sure that women on the board have prominent positions so that their voices are heard.
Wonderful. Neelan, same question. How did you get your board seat?
What I would say is, first off, I think it's consistent with everyone else. Generally, it's not search firms. It really is, networking, it's word of mouth, it's intentionality, it is being prepared for the opportunity. And so, in my case, how I was very intentional. I had been involved politically. I got a presidential appointment, Senate confirmation. That gave me credibility in the sense of, I was a physician. I was a doctor. I practiced medicine for 12 years. So, I was someone completely out of the box, but got appointed to the board of, again, a uranium company by the president, and which we ended up spinning out of the federal government, doing the largest privatization in U.S. history, which gave me some degree of credibility. And then, again, appointed by the governor of Texas, the pension fund, which gave me another a different kind of credibility. And then finally, I knew I needed to I felt like I wanted to transition from medicine, and I felt corporate boards was a way to do that. I said if I could be on one board, the best board would be an airline because they let you fly for free. And so I was very focused. I live in Dallas. I was able to get, I didn't know anyone at American. I literally wrote out why I should be on the board of American Airlines. You never know when opportunity presents itself. I'm at a football game one day, guy sitting next to me. We get along really well. We best buddies here. And he says, look, I'd love to get you on this not-for-profit, that not-for-profit. I was like, whoa, time out. Tell me who you are. And he said, former CEO of the RTC, former CEO of Timira, former CEO of American Airlines. I was like, if you think I'm so good, just put me on the board of American Airlines. And I went through this literal speech, and he was like, wow, okay, look, I'll be out there tomorrow. Let me look into this, and I'll be back to you. He came back, said, look, here, this is how American structured, blah, 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 blah. We have 3 boards, actually. We have the airline everybody knows about. We have an IT company, Sabre. We have an asset management company, American Beacon. And he said, I think it'd be perfect on that. I said, well, what's the compensation? He said, free first class travel anywhere in the world, American flies for you and your wife. I was like,
yeah.
Thank you. And that was the beginning. And then, of course, Starwood, I needed a place to stay. And, it was a series of things. So intentionality, being prepared. But, again, while search firms are in the mix in some of these searches, it's actually far fewer than one would, than one recognizes. Having said that, you should certainly be aware of these firms. They should be aware of you.
So that's interesting. How would you recommend that someone make themselves known to a search firm?
Who is that directed? Is that directed at me or who?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, I would the same process. Networking. Who do we know that knows so and so? It's always better coming from a warm lead as opposed to just a cold call. But their job is to actually find you. Their job is to identify you, and that's the beauty of this. And so one shouldn't be afraid to cold call if you need to. But I mean, look, you also need to have your act together in terms of why you have a specific skill set that you think relates to a particular board. Again, I would try to understand what industry, what's my skill set, what's my value add, so that when you're asked the question, you have, a thoughtful answer that addresses the issue of why someone would want you on their board.
Okay, good. So that's an idea of what folks should do to prepare themselves for a board seat. What's the number one thing that you witnessed that you would recommend that women or ethnic minorities don't do in their pursuit of a corporate board seat? Molly, why don't we start with you? What would you recommend the folks not do?
I think, there is kind of like a line that you walk, to Neelan's point, where you're intentional and you want to be on a corporate board, but you don't want to look like, oh my gosh, this is my full-time thing that I'm going to go after. I think you want to be prepared and be ready, but you don't want to come across as, you know what, this is a full-time job that I'm doing, and it's obvious to everyone. The only reason you want to be on a board is to be on a board. So I think you have to align the two. So I would say the one thing I would recommend that you don't do is don't come across in such a way that, you know what, I'm doing this because I just want to be on a corporate board. I want this. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think there's kind of a little bit of a dance, lack of a better term, that you may need to do to be intentional, to be prepared, to kind of think through the industry, but not coming across as if, oh, this is the only thing that, you know, I'm going to do. So it's kind of like be hungry, but not so much that it looks like you're just starving and that's all you want. So that's what I would recommend, is to kind of watch that. And I think be strategic about where you feel you fall in and be comfortable having just the general conversation. So that would be my thought.
Great. Adela, you want to add to that at all? What do you think people should not do if they're just pursuing a corporate board seat?
Well, you shouldn't pursue it at the expense of continuing to build your expertise and making sure that people know what your expertise is. I think that's the most important thing, really. I think that board positions are a needle in a haystack, and you can be very strategic like Neelan was, and I think that's excellent. But I think the key is what experience he brought, how he fit his experience to that position, to that company. I think if you have the expertise, you can find a spot on a board where there's a fit. But I think the strength comes from what you bring to the table, which is your abilities, your insights, your collegiality. I mean, those are the skills that you need to be building all the time.
Okay, good. Christine, you want to add to that? What do you
Yeah,
think?
I agree. Thank you. I agree with what everyone has said about being prepared, because you don't know when the opportunity is going to come up. And to Molly's point, it's not so much I want to be on this board, but really here, and to Adela's point, here are the skills I bring that I can help solve problems. So it's really about how you fit into the gap that they have, how you fit into the problems that they're trying to solve. And in my experience with Boyd, I didn't play the female diversity card. Like, oh, there were no subtle hints of you should put me on because I'm a woman, because no one wants to be a token. I don't want to be on a board because they need to put a woman there. I want to be on the board because they know I'm going to be a contributor and I'm going to help advance the strategy of the organization. And as it turns out, the feedback I got was I was up against 4 men I did not know at the time. And the feedback I got was that I went in the most prepared. And that's one reason I got the spot.
Interesting. So Christine raises an interesting point. Do you think that being female or African American helped or hindered you in being offered your first board seat? Youngblood.
Well, I think that being a person of color, be it Black, Hispanic, being a woman, I think those things can be additive but not determinative. And so, again, to Christine's point, being prepared, understanding the company, understanding your value add, where you can bring value to the enterprise is really what you want to be focused on. And so, and then the rest of it is, is just additive. I think it's important to have women. I think it's important to have people of color on boards, because you also have employee base, and having someone to be able to speak to employees of color or women and things like that, having that voice on the board is really an important voice. Having said that, you need to be able to add value beyond that. It needs to be, look, whether it's in finance or IT or or in regulatory or whatever else it is. Again, you don't want to be a token. You want to be, a value-added board member, and that's, I think, what one has to focus on.
Great points. Does anyone want to add to Neelan's points there?
I would just add, I think he said it extremely well, but I would also just add, while it's a big plus today, I think sometimes we have to look at things in context, and it may not have always been that way. So, because our consumer base has changed, the people who are working for various companies all look differently. So having a diverse board is a plus to reflect both your consumer base, your client base, as well as your, employees. But I think, as I've said to people before, I believe I'm more than two boxes that people may check. It's not just that I'm Molly's female and African American. I have other skills that I bring to that. And I think, leveraging all of those is wonderful. But the plus is that it's additive. I think Neelan said it extremely well. It's a plus, but it wasn't always. And I just want context to be something that we think about as well. And I think it's a good point for people to take advantage of it while you can.
I'd like to add to Molly's point about context, because it's really important. As the numbers showed, there's been very slow progress over this for a number of years. And then we see in the last year, for example, in some cases, there's a push where we're doing better than we were before. In one of the examples, there was as much progress in 1 year as had been in the previous 5 years. So I think we step back and ask the question, why is that? And I think that goes to Molly's point about context. I think there are two things going on here. One is there is more social awareness now about diversity in general, and having the stakeholders, it's not about shareholders alone anymore, the people who own the stock, it's about the stakeholders. And who are the stakeholders? As the other panelists have mentioned, they're the employees, they're the customers, they're the vendors, they're the community. And so this new era of ESG, environmental, social, and governance, has now come into play, particularly over the last year. And some institutional investors are now putting what I'll call report cards up against particularly publicly traded companies, and they're looking to see and have expectations for diversity on boards, diversity in the C-suite. And if that's not happening with sufficient speed, some of those institutional investors are now saying, we're not investing in you anymore, or we're going to invest less. So there's now financial pressure coming down from the top. And I think that gets corporations' attention pretty quickly. And then we see on the social side, there's more coming up from the bottom, from the employees, from the communities, and from the stakeholders in general, that they want the boards to look different. They want the C-suite to look different. So bottom up, top down, things are changing quickly, in large part because of an ESG push.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I know that you all are aware of the rule that the Securities Exchange Commission adopted in August that NASDAQ had proposed last December, that requires that companies that are listed on NASDAQ report their makeup of their corporate boards. So that kind of pressure, I think, is the type of pressure that Christine was pointing to. But Adele, did you have anything you want to add to this point?
Yeah, I'd like to just comment that, and I think this point was made, and I want to underscore it. You don't want to be the token on the board. And what I mean by that is, if you aren't taken seriously because you were picked because you were a woman or because you were Hispanic, and nobody is expecting you to participate fully, that is very unsatisfying. That is not something that is tolerable in my mind. And I can't even imagine it. The boardroom is small. Everybody pulls their weight. When someone doesn't, it's very clear. And so you want to go into a boardroom very prepared. And that's why, my emphasis is on experience, on ability, on insights, because you don't want that position. It's okay to be the first, but my mantra on that is not for long, because then I want a company. I want another woman. I want more people of color, because you don't want to stand out all the time. I mean.
Right. To Adela's point, though, I think, in the case of, for instance, Scientific Games, I came in as the fourth person of color. There weren't women, I think, on the board at the time, but again, I'm the lead director. We have two women on the board now. It's the culture has changed dramatically, and I think it's a function of the leadership, but also, again, being prepared and not relying on one being a person of color or woman or what have you. It's trying to contribute in the best way possible to create value for the company.
Connie, can I add to just that one part of the conversation? I know we need to move on, but just, I think Adela brings up a good point. I just want to also point out, just because you're around the table and you are there and you contribute, doesn't mean the change is going to happen as quickly as we would all like. And I think, even if it's more than one person of color or more than one woman that's on the board, sometimes it does take a while to make that shift. Having been in industries where, I've worked where I'm one of the few people of color, one of the few women around the table, it takes a while and a minute for someone to kind of gain trust, to be able to have their ideas be accepted. And so I think just one of the other things I would add is a little bit of patience, because that shift doesn't just happen immediately in terms of just the engagement, even, with familiar and comfortable colleagues.
One last thing I do want to add. I know the issue of ESG is very important and prominent with regard to the changing. But I think the death of George Floyd also was enormously important in terms of people's awareness, dialogue, conversation, and reflection, that I think, pushed the issue not only of race, but also gender, more prominent.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's really the catalyst behind much of this. I agree completely.
And being in a pandemic where we had more time to see some of those things and be at home to observe many more of those things, as opposed to the busy lives that, not to say we're not busy today, that we were all leading, certainly helped focus those attentions.
Adela, do you have anything else you want to add to this?
No, I'm in agreement and aligned.
Okay, great. So, all right, let's fast forward a little bit. You've done everything. A person has done everything that you've recommended, and they're now scheduled for their first board interview before joining the board. What would you tell women and minorities never to say during that interview? Neelan, you want to start?
I think that the point that's been made is, you should put me on this board because I'm a woman. You should put me on this board because I'm a diverse candidate. I mean, don't go there. Talk about how you can create value, how you see the future of the company. Understand the network of relationship. What is it they need, skill set they need to fill, and how you best, demonstrate that. And I would also say, look, you should also be prepared not to go on the board, meaning maybe this is not the right board for me. I know we're all, in the beginning, one is anxious to maybe get on a corporate board or whatever, but, not every board is the right fit. And so you should also be secure enough in yourself, disciplined enough in yourself to say, you know what, this isn't a good fit for me. I appreciate the offer. That's great, but I gotta, that this isn't, because these boards, it's not all straight up. There are challenges. I've been involved in, bankruptcies. All there can be lots of drama, and so you want to be with people who you respect, who respect you, who, you know, are pulling in the same direction and have the values both from the management side as well as on the board side that, you know, where you want to be. So, you know, it's not a one-way street is my point. Have some faith, confidence in yourself in terms of who you are, that, you know what, thanks, but no thanks.
So Neely raises a good point that you want to emphasize what value you would add to the board, focusing on what is the needed skill set on the board. But if you're someone who's on the outside, you're not on the board yet. How do you know? How do you know what skill set they need?
What I did, and the reason that the feedback I got was that I was most prepared. And I would say this to women, persons of color, anyone who's looking for a board seat. I got my hands on absolutely every piece of publicly available information. I read the 10Ks, I read the 10Qs, and for Boyd, we publish our governance guidelines. We've got our charters, our committee charters on our website. The others, so as much as you can find, I went to newspapers to see what was, you know, what might have been published. Are there negative stories that I should know about? Because I wouldn't want to be surprised, because specifically to Neelan's point, this, for me, I think it needed to really be a cultural match in terms of culture and values, and not people who just talk and don't walk, but actually walk the talk as well. You don't really know about the culture till you get inside. So how can you find out before you get in? I talked to as many people as I could think of that had connections to Boyd Gaming in the community and asked them about the organization and said, you know, there's a possibility I may be asked to join the board. Tell me what you know about the company. You know, is this a good place? Are these good people? Do they treat their employees well? So as much external information as you can get. And then I took all that information and went into my interviews with a whole set of questions. Again, and that's kind of testing, what do you need and how I can help fill that gap. So by asking a number of questions, I got a better sense of where I could play strongest, where the organization needed that.
Good points. Anyone want to add to that?
I would just,
I wanted
just
to
gonna
add to
add-
that. Oh, go ahead.
okay, just really quickly, I think Christine hit it all, get your hands on every single thing. But one way too of, I don't want to say filling the gap, because you don't know exactly what they need until you really kind of have that conversation. But another way of doing that is after you put your hands on every single thing and you're looking at the corporate board of directors and what their skill sets have been, there may be an opportunity there to say, oh, wow, they don't have someone that may have an IT fit. And if you have an IT background, I'd certainly emphasize that. And with ESG being as dominant as it is, maybe they don't have someone that's got, you know, more on the personnel HR side of it. So, you know, where your skill set is kind of where you see there may be a possible gap or a hole, that's an opportunity as well when you look at the background of some of the board members.
Well, something that hasn't been mentioned is I always look for, because I come from an investment banking background, I always look for the street reports, the, you know, brokerage firms that write reports on the stocks of the company you're interested in, because they zero in on what's wrong with the company.
Yep.
And what are the strengths. And I go back a year, and it also gives you a history. Oh, you know, they brought this product. It didn't work at first. We're expecting a fix. You know, you already go in knowing so much more from an analytical investment standpoint. I find that very valuable. And then, of course, what Christine said about trying to talk to as many people as possible. To me, that's important. You know, I know some people, you know, just are hands off if they're being considered for a board, but it's such valuable information how, if you know some of the people on the board, how could you not? I always do approach.
Wonderful point. So we're running out of time. I want to give everyone on the panel an opportunity to share with the audience one piece of advice. So if you could leave the audience with one piece of advice on what they can do to find themselves on a corporate board by next year, what would it be? Molly, do you want to start?
Sure. I think one thing I would recommend is be really clear about what your strengths and weaknesses are, what your skill sets are, what you bring, and where you have your own gap. So I would just, the preparation is the piece of advice that I would leave folks with, is, to be prepared both in terms of your skills and abilities, and then maybe scope out the industry that you're most interested in, going into.
Okay, great. Adela?
Well, I'm going to take it as a given that you're an expert in your field, whatever that is, and that what you do next is figure out what industry, what areas you really care to be very engaged in, because I think Neelan brings home a point that is forgotten in the pursuit of board positions, which is there are problems. And these problems require a lot of time and attention, maybe dealing with lawyers. And if that's not your thing, okay, then, you're still going to be there having to deal with these issues. So you should find enjoyment, and therefore it should be in an industry or organization that you really are motivated to put the time in. This is not the time. It's not just the 4 or 5 meetings a year. That has nothing to do with it. It's extensive.
Mhm.
Christine, what last point would you want to share with our audience?
Be mindful that someone's always watching.
Okay.
You just don't know when someone's in that audience or someone's sitting next to you at the football game. Someone's always watching. So best foot forward all the time and be prepared to have that conversation.
Okay.
Well,
Neelan.
Interesting to Christine's point. How I got on the board of Scientific Games, I was at a dinner sitting next to someone, just talk, just normal conversation, life, kids, blah, 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 blah. I get a call the next day. Hey, look, they want you on the board of Scientific Games. That was the general counsel of Scientific, whatever, it was, some executive. It's like, okay. I mean, that was it, in some sense, I guess it was an interview, but not from my perspective. I had no idea but again, it just highlights Christine's point. My piece of advice, again, I concur with Molly and Adela as well as Christine's points. I would also say, again, the importance of networking, the importance of being in the mix, being prepared, when opportunity presents itself. Again, a guy by the name of Bill Bradley said something to me. He was a senator and was running for Senate, New Jersey, and he said, if the president of the United States walks in the room, what's your ask? It's like, what do you? I don't. He said, look, if you're meeting with the president, you're there for a reason. They know what they want out of you. You should know what you want. Be prepared. Be ready with that ask, and that is part of what triggered, a lot of my decision making in terms of getting on these different boards. Being prepared when opportunity presents itself.
Wow. That's really valuable information, you guys.
Yeah.
No, really, I am totally sincere. I have been thinking about these questions for a while, and you've all brought to bear interesting perspectives on your answers to these questions. So I really appreciate your perspectives.
No,
And I can't wait for the opportunity to follow up in the breakout rooms with
Sure.
each of you. And so thank you for your time. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for being on this panel. And now we're going to go into our breakout rooms.
Connie, thanks for your leadership.
Thank you, Connie.
Yep. Thank you.
So how to go to your breakout rooms? If you look on the left side of your screen, attendees, you will see the word agenda. Click on agenda. You will see your breakout room. Click onto the session and then click join now. And that will take you to your breakout room. If you have any issues accessing your breakout room, please go to the Help Center, which is located on the left of your screen, or email events@5050wob.com. Also, if you want a deeper dive into these issues of how to be board ready, I invite you to register for our December workshops, Path to the Boardroom and Get on Board. Visit our website, 5050womenonboards.com, for more information and to register. If you have any questions about anything, email info@5050wob.com or me, your event chair, ConnieHarper@gmail.com. And finally, you're invited to attend the first ever closing celebration of the National Conversations on Board Diversity, which will be held this Friday, November 19th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. Everyone who is in the audience today is already registered for the closing event. So thank you all for participating, and I hope that you join us next year. See you in the breakout rooms.